Hey everybody, we are back with Creativity is the Cure. I am your host, Malcolm Moore. Today I'm broadcasting from Maestro Machinations studio way out in the desert of Palmdale, California. Today I have a very special guest, my old friend from Rochester, New York, Eric the Taylor. How you doing, Eric?
Hey man, what's going on? Am I allowed to call you Malcolm? No, vampire.
Anything. Yeah, I go by different names. We have, I thought of you because I know you like nature out here. So far, I have seen lizards, bunnies, quail, and scorpions. Oh my.
Well, that's all an amazing tale of animal adventures. I think of those, my favorite might be the scorpion.
Yeah, we just met. We got the welcoming committee after we've been here about a month. We got the Scorpion Welcoming Committee.
Now, do you tap your shoes out to make sure you don't have any scorpion friends before you put your feet in the shoe?
I might be trying that tomorrow morning. Yeah, I don't think I'll be walking around the house barefoot anymore.
That's right.
All right, so Eric, just so you know, the format of this, it's called Creativity is the Cure, because I think there's a lot of things out there where people think that only people like you and I are creative. People that make art or dance or music or things like that, stereotypical artists. But it is my belief that everybody is artistic, and we can't just say it's the right side of the brain. We're right-brained people. We're very creative. I think that everybody is, and it was a couple of years ago where I was facing some challenges, and I solved them, and I said, well, wait a second. I'm a drummer. You know, if I do a drum solo, it's stream of consciousness, improvisation, and I realized I was starting to solve all my issues in life with the same part of my brain. Can you relate to that at all?
I think I can, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. We're made up of so many different portions of the brain, and for some reason we're told that this hemisphere does this and this hemisphere does this, but you're right. I mean, it's a combination of all those things that make up who you are and the talents in which you are, and I do often apply some of my artistic abilities in my everyday life.
Yeah, like what? Can you give me an example?
Problem solving, I think I turn towards my creative juices to creatively solve whatever problems I'm faced with, whether they be monetarily based or if it's a situation within the family household. I use the creative portion of my brain to solve everyday problems. And I don't think I think about it in these terms like you're bringing to podcasts. I just do it. I think it's very interesting that you're putting light on it, bringing the idea forward that creativity is whom you are every single day, whether you're doing your artistic endeavorments or not. You are a creative human. And you don't just use it when you're standing in front of your canvas or parked behind your drum set. And so this is interesting. What have you learned so far? Can you share a little bit with me?
I think about everybody. I don't only interview artistic people. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of visual artists, puppeteers, actors, musicians, but I interviewed, like, my brother is an English teacher, or my son is a veterinary assistant, or a couple of my students who, you know, they're not even 20 years old yet. And I think everybody realizes what we're talking about now. It makes me think of my father, who I lost a year ago. He was a lawyer and very common sense kind of guy, you know, sharp as a tack. And I never really thought of him as an artist. My mom was a wonderful artist. She could, you know, paint a picture and draw anything realistically. But my dad, he was left-handed, and he would grab a napkin and be really excited to make a drawing for me. And it would be absolutely crazy. And I think a lot of people would laugh at that, but I loved it. It was like a cross between latter-day Picasso and those John Lennon drawings, you know, that he would do.
Yeah.
And then I thought about it. I was like, you know, my dad was a lawyer. And I remember when he was younger, he wanted to be an actor, and his parents weren't let him because this was, you know, 1950s. So when we would go to church when I was younger, he would be in a lot of plays, and he was a great actor. I figured he just kind of settled for, all right, I'm going to be a lawyer because I get to perform. I've got to have charisma. I've got to win the case. You know what I'm saying?
Sure do. Do you think he went about it with that creative flow that you're speaking of now? I bet you did.
Yeah, I think he did. I mean, I don't think he'd be stereotypical creative, but now as I look back to see how he solved problems, I'm really amazed. I remember he took me, this is outside of the element of who I am, but he took me to a political party once, and we had been talking about, I was like, I don't know how you do this. I can't remember anybody's name. And he goes, I can't either. Watch what I do. And he would go up to someone, reach his hand out, and he'd go, Jim Moore. And that would force the person to say their name back. It was brilliant. And I thought that was pretty creative. Please do. I know I've got, I don't know if you know what I've been doing lately, but I've been a teacher out here. I've got middle school students now, and there's 800 of them. Hopefully they're not listening right now, but one of the things I do, if I can't remember the names, I go, oh, how do I spell your name again? That's a good one, too.
That's a real good one.
Hey, before we go deep into this, I wanted to talk about, you and I have known each other for roughly 3 decades, and you're one of the most creative people I've ever met. Just to tell some of the listeners out there, I remember you setting a piano on fire several times and having somebody play it. I remember you performing on top of a rooftop. If I would describe you as a musician to someone else, I would say I think of you as an elemental musician. You've always got like an instrument that is underwater in a river. Visual art is often submerged instruments. You have performed almost controlling all the elements, wind, water, fire, and I think that is very original, radically original. So can you tell me how you got into this stuff? Another time I remember I came over to your place. I think the mayor had hired you and you made like a forest of, I don't know what they were, weeds or giant flowers, and you made some kind of a presentation downtown. What was that?
Oh, yeah, we did an installation. I was using PVC pipe, polyvinyl chloride, and creating these installations. What was interesting about that was I was using the same materials to create these giant swamps. Remember, they were swamps?
Oh, that's right. They were swamps. Exactly.
They were swamps. But I was using some of the same materials that was, in fact, killing these swamps. You know, this polyvinyl chloride stuff is brutal on the environment. So I was, you know, it was sort of giving birth to these creations, these immersive situations using the same materials which are, in fact, killing them. So it was sort of that kind of a juxtaposition. But I'm not as involved in the visual arts currently in my life because I'm just recording a lot of music. But what year was it that you began working at the House of Guitars?
That must have been somewhere between 1995 and 2000, I think, maybe. I should ask Alex Kelly, who's got like a photographic memory. Probably 96, 97.
And that's where I met you, correct?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you were going to do a performance downstairs, and you came up because at that point I was kind of running the keyboard drum section upstairs. Yeah. By the way, to listeners out there, there's a great place in upstate New York, Rochester, called the House of Guitars. Really wild. I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what I can say on this recording, what I can't, but we'll just leave it there that it's a unique environment. And is that where you played on top of the roof?
I did do an on-roof performance there where we were translating the winds with electric guitars.
Yeah.
Part of the translating environment series, deciphering the elements. Again, that's going back, I guess, close to 30 years now. Is that true? 25 years ago?
It's insane.
Oh, it's insane. It's insane. But I mean, we've been in bands together.
Yeah. I was thinking earlier when I was driving back home, I think the first time we performed together was when you had that band Black Olive, and it was you, me, Jen Kerner. I think I replaced this very also unique drummer named James Bryce. Remember him?
Sure, of course, yeah. Jamie Bryce, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you replace him? I can't.
I think he had quit, and you guys asked me to sit in. I think that's when you and I really started working a lot, and we ended up doing a lot of bands and a lot of projects together.
Yeah, because I think you were part of Nature Wastes Nothing, too.
Yes. We've done a lot of projects together, and before we move way back in your history, tell me, how did you end up setting pianos on fire? Did that have anything to do with our mutual friend Figure, a.k.a. Brandon Hungness?
Actually, I believe he's now B.H. Paulson.
That's right.
And interestingly enough, he and I are deeply involved in this extremely avant-garde record right now that we're recording.
And for you to say that says a lot.
Yeah, no, it's his music for the most part, although did I lose you? So, I've continued to work with Brandon, a.k.a. Figure, a.k.a. B.H. Paulson.
He's like the Zelig of our friends.
Yeah, no, he's an incredible musician, and so we've got some interesting work that's coming out together. But the piano bonfires, like, for me, I think there was a birthplace of piano lessons that I was forced to take as a child.
Right.
And am I allowed to swear?
Oh, of course.
I couldn't fucking stand my piano teacher.
Yeah.
Horrible.
And why? And I find that interesting because I'm a private teacher right now and a music teacher. What is it that you didn't like about it?
She was very clear on making me understand how little she enjoyed giving lessons to me like that. She was just a horrible person towards me anyway. So
yeah.
I wanted to learn piano. Of course, my ADHD didn't really allow for me to concentrate that hard, and I think I learned how to read for a period of time in the early 80s. I speak of reading music. I got good at it for a while, but then I realized I didn't care much for being a musician. I wanted to be the artist. I wanted to be the person that was writing this music, and perhaps one day others could learn how to read it.
So are you saying you wanted to be a composer from an early age?
Before I even know what that all meant, I was experimenting with my own chord progressions and so forth, and experimental music. As soon as I learned of Brian Eno and what he was creating as far as what possible musics were, that sent me on a whole other journey that continues to this day.
Well, let me add to that. One of the things that really brought us together as friends is our mutual admiration for those people that made, for lack of a better term, soundscapes, ambient music, and I can name them all: David Torn, John Hassel, Harold Budd, Brian Eno. A lot of times I wake up in the morning and I climb up this tower where we live and I brood over the horizon with my espresso, and I like to put on that stuff to start the day. And like Pat Metheny, Bright Size Life, any of that stuff that takes you to another world. Another one, Daniel Lanois, Belladonna, just absolutely beautiful blankets of sound. And you and I did a lot of improv with that type of stuff when we met, right?
We did. In fact, that's kind of what drew us together. It was our conversations that we were having while you were at the House Guitars.
Yeah.
It was interesting for me because you really did have control of that keyboard and drum room. Like, that was your room. Like, you were sort of overseeing and managing that. To the point of where, and I laughed with B.H. Paulson about this recently. It's like you had this corner where you kind of almost set up sort of like an office studio. And at any given time, you'd come in there and you'd be burning someone a CD, or you'd be working on some music, like on the clock while you're,
yeah.
this floor. You had this. There were monitors. There was some, 8-channel or 16-channel digital.
And I've got to hand it to Bruce and Armin. They let me order really weird stuff and sell it. Remember, we had a whole wall of Taos drums that our friend Jerry Marotta used to endorse, and he still plays. We had that stuff. We had any kind of weird cymbal. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then you and I would investigate the latest synths, the Korgs and the Moogs. And there was that point where we had that one room, remember, it was packed with like Taurus pedals and 909 drum machines.
Yeah.
Eventually, Les Claypool came and bought most of that stuff, but yeah, that was a wild time.
So that those were my stomping grounds. That was a playground for people like you and I. It was a lot of fun, and we had some really deep conversations, and I think that's what drew me towards you and what you played with Paul Paulson a few times as well in his band. I remember seeing...
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about his musicianship. I mean, I've heard him make recordings on 4 tracks that sound as good as anybody on 5.1 surround. I mean, I don't know what he does. He gets this incredible sound that takes you to another world, and there's nobody that sounds like him. And if I remember correctly, didn't he work a little bit and study with Glenn Branca?
Yes, he was in Glenn Branca's orchestra.
Yeah, he did that, and then he had this really cool band back then called Oblivion Ensemble. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
I want to go way, way, way back in time. What is the first memory you have of being creative? And it doesn't have to be art or music. When is the first time you realized that you could color outside the lines and just find the core of who you are without worrying about what anybody thought?
That's a hell of a question, Malcolm. And I don't have a very good memory.
Well, think about, okay, you were in Rochester, you were 5 years old. What was it like? What part of you was improvising or being creative at that point?
I remember thinking at that point, I remember some of my early drawings. I felt like when I was drawing, you do begin to sense a true freedom when you are in the moment and creating. And I think I remember experiencing some of that sort of that inner Zen sensation that only art can provide.
Yeah.
And I remember experiencing that with drawings probably when I was 5, maybe 6 years old.
Wow.
And then music came a bit later, maybe when I was around 10 or 11. There was a piano in the house, and I just remember reaching into it and putting my foot on the sustain pedal and playing the strings because it was an upright. and creating what to me sounded like this, I was mimicking the rainstorms that were happening outside.
Yeah.
Those are some of my earliest memories of artistic endeavors that I can recall.
You and I didn't really ever fit in when we were little kids, nor during the Rochester music scene. I thought you and I were kind of outlanders. Did those early memories of being creative, did that allow you an escape, a comfort from everyday life?
Sure, it still does today. There's nothing on this planet Earth that I would rather do than be involved with making a great piece of music. There's nothing. There's no drug. There's no sexual desire greater. There's nothing drives me more than being involved with music. And oddly enough, if I do not have the opportunity to make music for a stretch of period, it alters my character. Like, I can become depressed. I can become angry. Like, I need to have the creative process in my life. It levels me out. All
right, 2 comments to go with that. First one, funny. My wife, Christine, her favorite video game is called Animal Crossing, and you're making me think about if you don't play that game for a couple of weeks, the cockroaches come. So it sounds like on a lighter level, that's what's happening with you. You got to stay on it every day or bad things happen.
Yeah, I mean, not every day. And of course, as I grow older, my chemicals are cooling a little bit.
Yeah.
But my wife, Binti, understands, and she's been extremely supportive, and she has seen some things in recent time that have shown that some of this is actually paying off. And so she's extremely supportive, but she will, okay, kids, go to bed, Papa needs to work. And I do. I need to create, or I become a difficult person to be around.
Yeah, that's understandable because it's inherent of who you are in your soul, right?
Somewhere, Malcolm.
This leads into the question I always ask everybody, and you kind of answered it. Do you think that creativity can help people suffering from anxiety or depression? Yourself and people in general, what has your experience been?
That is the biggest yes I can give you on this interview.
Yeah.
It is probably, the greatest way to cure a soul in need. Would probably be able to put them in front of, put them in front of that canvas, put them in front of that piano, and let the soul work it out. Yeah, oh yeah. some of the greatest art probably comes from moments of suffering and healing.
We haven't had a chance to hang out in a long time, but I've seriously got into biographies. I just love them. Even if it's like a musician I don't listen to, I love to hear people's stories and how they overcame things. And one thing I'm learning is everybody that does this and writes a biography, first of all, that's creative. Second of all, it really helps them put everything in place and step outside themselves and see what's going on. I think writing, painting, music, it's kind of fixing us and it's getting our head straight, interpret the world.
As your soul sees it.
Yeah. Yeah, and everybody's different. That's why I think I love reading biographies, seeing how someone else sees the world is completely different. I think I have 10 books about Frank Zappa, and they're all different. And I know from what I've heard, he'd probably be upset that someone else wrote books about him, but everybody interpreted their time with him differently. So to me, it's all beautiful.
Sure. No.
I was also thinking of you when we were talking earlier on the phone today. I love it out here in Palmdale in the desert, and one of the cool things was about 8 minutes from where I live is where Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart went to high school together. There's got to be some magic dust in the dirt out here.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Harold Budd was out there.
Oh, I didn't know that. I got to find out. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff. Of course, the flip side is the Flat Earth Society existed out here. It's not doing so well lately, but it existed for quite a while. And then, of course, one of our favorites, Thomas Dolby, had something to say about that, right?
He sure did. With his 1984 release, was it? He just finished up a tour. I love Thomas Dolby.
Oh, me too. I can't say enough, and I'm so glad I've got you as a friend, because there's not too many people I talk about it that take him dead serious like you and I. I mean, I absolutely love his work. Old stuff, new stuff.
I talked to our mutual friend Jerry Marotta about Thomas Dolby not too long ago, and he told me that he did some session work for Thomas.
No way. What era?
Never made the light of day.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Jerry told me once he did an album with Jewel, a whole album that was shelved and it's still not out.
Yeah.
People like you and me, we're like, we just want to hear it. Please, let's go to a tiny room. Please let us listen.
When they finished Peter Gabriel's Soul record, he may have told you that they had previously recorded the full record, but like the security record.
Yeah, it had like a security vibe. There was different versions of Big Time and
pre-Lenoir.
Yeah. I'd love to hear that. And I know some artists don't like that, but I flipped out about a month ago when they re-released Synchronicity with all the outtakes. Have you listened to that?
No, not yet.
Promise me, listen to the deranged mixes. There's a couple of them in there, and they're so out there and so astounding.
I can't wait. The Police remain one of my top bands still,
So innovative. And separately, I mean, that movie that Stuart Copeland made when he put a drum set and a recorder and a microphone in a backpack and went deep into Africa and just jammed with all these tribes and came back and remixed it into The Rhythmatist.
The Rhythmatist. Well, and Andy Summers has put out some great records.
Oh, God, so many. I love his one that's an homage to Thelonious Monk, who's my favorite jazz musician.
Oh, yeah, I remember that Sting was on that record.
Yeah, he did Around Midnight, I think, but Peter Erskine on drums. I think Dave Carpenter on bass, who I believe you and I met at House of Guitars one time. But let's go a little bit more into your past before I get to the feature of what I really want to ask you. How about your parents? Were they creative? Do you also see parts of yourself from them now that you maybe inherited through DNA, your creativity, or maybe your environment growing up?
Interesting question. It's funny how often I'm going to be bringing up B.H. Paulson, but we were probably, again, 25 years old and just out for a walk, and he was asking me about my heritage, and I told him that I was half German, and he stopped and he said, well, that's the side of you that composes.
A little bit of Wagner.
So he stopped and he just stopped me and said, well, the German side is your composer side. That's where you get your composing from, your musical composing. So I often think about my parents who have both left, no longer with us.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm honored that I got to meet them.
Thanks, Malcolm. It skipped a generation for both of them. And both my mother, Ellen, and my father, Douglas, were both half German. German. But my father's father was a painter.
Uh-huh.
And his trade was he designed the large billboards that you'd see on the side of the thruway or on top of buildings and so forth. He would design them. That was the company that he worked for.
Wow.
Advertising company. But he was a painter, and he would travel weekends up to the Cape Cod and paint the ships coming in the harbors and so forth.
Wow, beautiful.
My mother's father, Forrest, he was there's a lot of music on my mother's side as well. Strickland was her maiden name. There are banjos on that side of the family that I've never seen, but I guess exist. From my grandfather, Forrest, who was, I guess, a mean banjo player.
He's a rambling man.
He's a rambling man, yep. So there was musicality and art on both sides of the family, but it skipped a generation. My father was a Hammond B3 enthusiast. Purchased one, couldn't play it, but owned one.
Yeah.
Big into jazz. And my mother, she could sing, but she never took herself very seriously. But there is art on both sides of the family.
And it sounds like environment, right?
Yes.
Right, and it sounds like you had an environment where you were at least allowed and probably encouraged to go on a little mental adventure, right?
Yes, but as I grew older, they kind of wanted to see me walk more of a straight and narrow path. Sort of like your father was told that he wasn't to be an actor, he was to be a lawyer.
Right.
My parents had always wanted me to do something like the idea of becoming a lawyer was brought up a few times when I was younger. But when we started to hang out, and I started to do some of those public installations in which I was receiving sponsorship and
Grant? You were getting grants too, right?
I was getting grants at that time, so they were able to sort of like, well, you know what, maybe there's something here, maybe he can do this kind of thing.
Right.
And that's how it was sort of left.
So with Black Olive, that's one of the first eras we started hanging out. Before me on drums, you had Jamie Bryce, you had Jen Kerner on vocals, you were on keyboards, and we had Alex Kelly on guitar.
Yeah, Jamie Bryce came after you.
Really? Huh. It's confusing because back then I played in a few other bands with him. I remember he and I were playing with Mick Fambro.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at one point I was on drums, and I remember Jamie had that really cool drum cat, that absolutely crazy geometrical giant and gray. Remember the electronic drums made by Drumcat?
Sure.
They sounded better than anything, but they were almost impossible to program. That's why I think when they came out with the Roland V drums, those guys were brilliant because you just turn it on and play. It was almost like the Apple version of drums, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. I remember his amazing digital drum set.
And didn't he have a Kai sampler that he hooked up to it? So just the sound quality was completely amazing.
I think about him often, actually.
I don't know if he's still with us. I remember he was maybe 10, 15 years older than me. Last time I heard from him was in Rochester, and that was a long time ago. I remember he was working. He made T-shirts when I put my Reanimation album out, and that's the last I saw of him. And my kids were really young, so I don't know. I don't know if he's still out there. Hopefully, if his time came, a UFO picked him up and took him off. I think that would probably be his favorite way to go, right? I'll never forget when I was running the top floor of the House Guitars, he came up with a remote control UFO, and he didn't ask. He stayed up there for about 2 or 3 hours flying it around, because remember we had the really high ceiling.
Sure. Yeah, well, yeah. I've been to the House Guitars recently, actually. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I believe Jamie Bryce is still with us.
Oh, that's good. If you see him, tell him I say hello.
I haven't seen him in years, but once every 2 or 3 years he'll poke in his he'll jump on Facebook, actually.
Now that I'm out in the desert, and they film a lot of like alien movies out here in Palmdale, like Roswell and stuff like that, I would not be surprised if he appeared in the air kind of like a cross between El Chupacabra and Mothman. I mean, I really think he'll probably transition into a supernatural creature.
He may already be one to try to act, I'll be honest.
All right, listen, this is the main focus. I got to ask you about your new band, Dark Sky Alliance. Who's in the band? Where did this idea come from?
Well,
tell me a little bit about it. I've listened to it about 2 or 3 times, and I absolutely love it.
Oh, good. So I have to answer the question myself, Malcolm. You introduced me to one of the great drummers of our time, Jerry Marotta.
Absolutely incredible. Nobody like him. Nobody on the planet.
And so, again, the years that you were at the House Guitars, like everybody came through those doors, and one of those people was Jerry Marotta.
And I've got to go back and tell you, I met him at Red Creek. I think, remember that club in Rochester? I met him there, I think, 87, 88, like that. I went to see him. Was it Robbie Dupree? Remember the solo artist from Woodstock?
I can't believe we're bringing him up. I know him I know of him very well.
Yeah, I think I heard my drum teacher, John McNeil, who is also the reason why I know Tony Levin. He said, hey, let's go see Robbie Dupree at the Red Creek tonight. Jerry Marotta's playing drums. And I was like, oh my God, I love Jerry Marotta. And halfway through the set, I went over to the bar where Jerry was having a drink and introduced myself. So sorry to interrupt, but that's where I first met him.
And then you went to work at the House Guitars and you set up a in-store performance for Jerry Marotta.
Yeah, I started bringing in different drummers, and what we would do is get funding from whoever they endorsed and bring them in and do clinics. And we had Omar Hakim, we had Ginger Baker. I mean, it was pretty wild. And then, yeah, Jerry Marotta, and that was I remember a really funny part of his performance where someone asked, what would you rather do if you couldn't be a drummer? What profession? He said he'd rather be a poet, and then he went on to perform some poetry for everybody there.
That was me. I asked him.
Oh, you remember that? And what did he recite? It was something funny. He just grabbed something random.
But he went deep for a second. He lost a couple of people in the audience with that one, I think.
All right, so I'm sorry. Yeah, we're like tangent kings here.
So you introduced me to Jerry Marotta 25 years ago.
Sounds about right, yeah.
And he and I have become very close friends, and we've in that 25 years, we have co-written thousands of pieces.
I was going to say, how many hours of recordings have you guys done?
Hard drives full of music. Hard drives full of music. And so, I'm a huge Fixx fan, Fixx.
Same.
And so I went to a show they were playing, I believe, in Troy, New York, and the guitar player, Jamie Westorm, is a well-known hired gun. He's worked with everybody from Brian Eno and Laurie Anderson to Depeche Mode and then Tina Turner.
He's pretty iconic. Nobody sounds like him.
Nobody sounds like him. He's an amazing guitarist, and so I approached him about the Black Olive project that we were doing.
Right. Yeah, and so everybody knows we had this very small band of the people we mentioned, Black Olive, and you brought some of that stuff, but it started expanding into this oral soundscape, right?
Yeah, so I started working with Jerry Marotta, and I invited members of the Fixx and Rupert Greenall, their keyboardist, their synthesist, would come to Dreamland, which is the studio that Jerry runs in West Hurley, New York.
Yeah, and originally, right, there was Jerry'sville. That was the Green studio, and then Jerry'sville moved, into Jerry's basement, and then he acquired and took over Dreamland, right?
He was involved with Dreamland the whole time, I think.
Right.
But yes, so Jerry Marotta runs 2 studios.
Right.
This pro rig he's got in his basement, Jerry'sville Studios, which is an excellent studio, and then Dreamland, which is beyond your wildest music.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, the famous spiritual author Thomas Merton stayed there and wrote some of his books there, like Seeds of Contemplation, and before Jerry worked there, I believe bands like B-52s recorded there, right?
Right, Love Shack.
Love Shack, yeah. That's a pretty well-known song.
The David Sylvian and Robert Fripp records were recorded there.
That I didn't know. Oh, my gosh. The First Day?
Correct.
Oh, if you haven't heard that album, Robert Fripp, David Sylvian, go get it. And Jerry on drums and Trey Gunn, right, on stick?
Trey Gunn. Mm-hmm.
All right, so you guys start working together. You start going and hanging with Jerry in Woodstock.
So, we did a record for Carpe Sonum Records called Lily Emotion, which came out about 7 years ago.
And who was on that?
Jerry, Rupert, and I are the Fragile Fate. So it's the three of us.
Right.
Which is that record. And, Robert Rich, who's a modern composer. Are you familiar with Robert Rich?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you'd really like his stuff.
Okay.
He did a guest appearance on that record. But ultimately, Malcolm, a switch just went off like in my head, and I stopped recording new music and just focused on listening to the thousands of hours that we had done as the Fragile Fate.
No exaggeration, yeah.
No, honest to God. And so this back catalog is now just starting to see the light of day. One of the modern composers whom I've come to really love is David Helpling. And David Helpling has put out 8 records on this label called Spotted Peccary Music. Spotted Peccary is one of the nation's largest independent labels that deals with this kind of music, modern composition, which sometimes can be ambient, sometimes can be, drone or Berlin school or a combination thereof, modern compositional pieces. Spotted Peccary Music is on the absolute cusp when it comes to releasing that type of...
Right, and what is I know it was originally a radio station, and now I'm sure it's streaming. I know a lot of your music was featured on there. What was that late night show where they'd play all these oral landscapes and spacey music? Do you remember?
Well, there's Echoes, and then there's, which, by the way, Echoes is an incredible, syndicated program, nationally syndicated program. And then Stephen Hill is the host of the one that you're thinking of.
Yeah.
So, I've had some luck with some, national and international plays in the last 7 to 10 years. Like, I've had magazine articles that I've had to ask people to help me translate because it's coming in a different language and so forth. I have had some luck. But it stems from, I've surrounded myself with great artists such as, Jerry and Tony Levin and members of the Fixx, just really accomplished musicians. And it's not to associate with their names, it's to be in a room with that level of artistic ability that challenges me and teaches me.
Like-minded individuals too, right?
Yes, but I think, these people they're seasoned veterans, and there's just so much to just soak up from them. No university can offer the lessons that I have learned being with some of these people in a musical situation.
Right, you painted yourself into a corner, and you have to rise to the occasion. I think that's brilliant.
And for the most part, I've been able to do it. It's been slow coming. I'm 53 years old, Malcolm. I wanted to be, a rock star at the age of 25. But now I've come to be a modern composer. And modern composers aren't really accepted often enough until they've reached roughly this age.
Right.
Kind of like the jazz musicians. They'll be playing jazz their entire life, but not until they're not realized until they're 77 years old.
Well, we've got to be honest. These days, the music business is not what it used to be, and people like you and me and a lot of these people we're talking about, we're honestly making music because we have to. It keeps us sane. We're making it just for the sake of art, and that should be the reason. If you end up making money, good for you. But the chances aren't too high. But if you can leave this realm and leave behind, the visual and the sonic art that you do, that's better than anything.
Okay, you're touching on something here, because I must tell you that as long as I've been churning at this, I didn't my music.
Right.
It began making it selfishly for myself. And that is when it began to resonate with others.
Right. And then it's honest and true, and everyone can respond to that. Even the people at the very high level that you've chosen to work with.
Yeah, that's it. That's really it. And it's much more satisfying for me.
You know, Eric, I think I try to keep these in an hour, and I feel like we're going so deep that we're going to need a part 2, if you're okay with that. But before we go, I want to get the hard facts, because it's really important to me that everybody hears your music, because it's astoundingly beautiful, and I think this is the best thing you've ever made. So who are the members of Dark Sky Alliance?
Sure. So Dark Sky Alliance is myself with Rupert Greenall of the Fixx, Fixx, our friend Jerry Marotta, and composer David Helpling. So it's a 4-member band. And David Helpling brought the project to Spotted Peccary Music, and we signed a 3-record deal.
Wow, that's amazing. And I was re-listening to the album on the way back home today. Did I see that Joe Locke's on this album?
Joe Locke is on this record, yeah.
Great, fantastic vibraphone player. One of the best.
One of the best. One of the greatest. I can't really explain how he approaches his instrument. That should be another podcast.
Yeah, and we'll get deep into that. He's just magical, the stuff he comes up with. He's kind of like makes me think of Tony Levin. Tony's definitely my favorite bass player, but when I think of him playing, I don't really think of bass. He's so melodic. He's just like this soul that shines and brings melody and bottom end and everything. And I think from the little bit I've seen of Joe Locke play, mostly with you, it's beyond a vibraphone part. It's just like these bright stars exploding.
Yeah, no, that's interesting that you say that. One thing about this project, Dark Sky Alliance, is that you do get to step outside of your area of interest. Jerry Marotta, the world knows him as one of the great drummers of all time.
Yeah, and if people don't know, Jerry is known for playing with Peter Gabriel, Hall & Oates, Indigo Girls, Sarah McLachlan, and the list goes on and on. It's baffling.
It goes on and on and on. But he's an amazing writer and arranger.
Great singer, too.
Great singer. He's an amazing bass player. And he's as good of a synthesist as anybody else in the band.
Yeah, I do love his bass playing. I've heard a lot of that.
Yeah. He's playing a lot of bass on this record. For the Fragile Fate, we've got another record coming out. He's the bass player.
He's amazing. Now, 2 things jumped out to me at this last listen. I think you've really brought, you and Jerry together, but you've brought out a whole nother side of Jerry. When I think of his drumming, to me it's very angular, it's very sharp, there's a lot of precision, but it's hard to put into words. This album, there's a lot of really round, warm, fuzzy type of stuff, almost submerged. It's just a whole nother side of his drumming that I never heard. It's like almost like the Loch Ness Monster. It's like something lurking. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I have to tell you, there's a lot of figures in the production pie. And David Helpling, the composer that I was telling you, the 4th member of Dark Sky Alliance, he was able to conjure a lot of that.
Was he the engineer and the producer?
No.
Who was?
But he mixed the record.
Oh, okay.
So he did, a lot of EQing. He did a lot of work on all of our parts, actually, to create that overall vibe that you're experiencing.
I imagine that you and Jerry produced it together, but who was the engineer?
Well, the record was being made over a period of 3 years, and we went through a lot of engineers.
Yeah. Whoever was around.
Again, we utilized...
Well, I say that knowing that you guys picked the best people, so...
Jerry has the best engineers, whether they're at Dreamland Recording Studios or if they're at Jarrettsville, the basement studio. He would be providing the engineers, people that are familiar with how Jerry likes his sound to sound. The drums are always mic'd up and ready to go when it comes to Jerry, and that's the importance of a good engineer, is that they understand what it is Jerry needs and how he likes to hear himself. So I would always walk into the situation ready to go, because there's always a fairly good engineer.
You're making me think of, I'm trying to remember whose podcast I heard this on. I think it was Conan O'Brien. They were telling us, oh yeah, this is just this week, he was interviewing Don Cheadle, the great actor, who played Miles Davis in a movie. And they're telling a story about Miles that he said, I want the recording machine on when my car pulls up. I want you to hear the car. I want you to hear me walking in. I want everything in case something cool happens.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that down in Woodstock, you know. I've worked with world-renowned engineers. In fact, who was the gentleman that was engineering at Taylorsville when it was at...
Well, you're probably talking about my friend from Canada, Roman Clune.
Yes, Roman Clune.
And then, of course, we had Pete Kagan. I mean, Jerry's had so many great engineers.
Yep, then there's Pete Kagan, yep. I would think that both of them, in fact, I know both of them are actually involved a little bit with this record.
Wow. Couple more questions before we go. One thing that I really loved about your new album is, it sounded like a cross between cello and a double neck violin that maybe like El Shankar would play. What was that beautiful low resonance string instrument?
That's Tony Levin.
Really?
Yeah, Tony on the upright bass.
Oh my God, it sounded Middle Eastern and ethereal. I got to ask him about that. I just interviewed him, but I only got through half the questions, kind of like you. So you did it again. You brought something out of somebody that no one's ever heard. I really thought you brought El Shankar in, but it was so deep and resonant. I was just like, who is that?
No, it's Tony. But let me tell you a story that my bandmates don't want you or your listeners to know about. Is that recording, and the track is called The Slow Train Home, I believe.
Yes, you're right.
And I wrote that 20 years ago.
Oh my God.
When I was experiencing some kind of an illness. I was mononucleosis. I almost died from mononucleosis 20-some years ago.
Yeah.
And it gave me such rich and vibrant fever dreams that I woke up knowing how to play it gave me a couple of songs. From mononucleosis, and I was so sick and held up for about a month, almost 2 months. I had set up my synthesizers around my bed because I couldn't do much else.
Yeah.
So I woke up with...
Why does that not surprise me? Go on.
Yeah, so I woke up with The Slow Train Home, like I knew how to play it. And I would play it over and over just to make sure that I remembered it. And then I recorded a demo of it, and I sent it to Tony Levin, who I, again, met through you.
Yeah.
So that song and that recording of his double, his electric upright bass is 20 years old. In fact, it was originally recorded on A-Dance.
Wow. When I was at House Guitars, that was the latest thing.
Yep. So, I mean, that's how... So I'm going way back into some of these archives I was telling you about. These old hard drives and bringing out these old songs. Like, you can go ahead and talk to Tony about it. He's not going to remember a lick of it.
That's funny because I just interviewed him last week, and I said, one of my favorite songs you ever did was you and Jerry playing with Robert Fripp, Daryl Hall singing You Burned Me Up, I'm a Cigarette, and I asked him some questions, and he's like, Malcolm, I'm sorry, I don't remember it at all.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand is these guys like Steve Gadd and Jerry and Rick Marotta and all these guys, they did so many sessions. I mean, I heard a story one time that, Steve Gadd was recording so much that Rick had to carry him from one studio to another. These guys, it was like breathing.
Yep.
So many things.
I just heard the new David Gilmour record last.
Oh, yeah. It's beautiful.
Yes, there's Steve Gadd.
Yeah.
I had no idea until my friend Robert Cordish mentioned it. He said, that's Steve on drums.
Yeah. Really beautiful recording. Where can people hear your music? I know it's on most streaming services. Are there any physical copies? Are you guys going to have vinyl or CDs or anything?
So, yes and yes and yes. Eric the Taylor is all, Spotify. Everybody loves and hates Spotify. I'm there under many different project release that you speak of, the Dark Sky Alliance, is on physical product. It's a CD as of now.
Okay.
I'd like to see a vinyl print of it someday, but I think that's a ways off.
This is the type of album that I insist goes on vinyl. I mean, this is the kind of thing like you lie on the floor with your headphones, you're looking at the artwork, you're reading the liner notes, you need to disappear into another world. If you can't, I loved being in the car today, surrounded by this music, driving through the mountains.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's kind of why we make music like that. You know, it's sort of it's adventurous and it can be an excellent soundtrack to what you may be doing. But to date, I think everything I've done has seen a CD release, a physical.
Yeah.
I'm at that age where I want the booklet inside and stuff, and to be able to read the liner notes, which Spotify doesn't offer you. I need to know the knowledge. I want to know what created the situation and who was involved.
Yeah. You and I grew up with that, and it's slowly coming around. A lot of my students who are teenagers, only a few years ago, they're like, Malcolm, we don't like albums, we don't like artists, we just like songs. But those are the kids that started giving me records for Christmas. And then I was like, okay, all right, I'll get a record player. And we did a whole 2 weeks last year learning about concept albums, and they were blown away. And then some kids like, Taylor Swift did a concept album, and that's how I grabbed them, by any means necessary.
Sure, of course. No, that's great. I mean, did you touch on The Wall?
Of course, that's a little too scary for some of the kids, but I did bring that one up. I had to put my favorite album on there, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I did a little bit of everything. Yeah, Pink Floyd for sure. I always end my interviews with a quote. I don't know if you're into this guy like I am, a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote this beautiful book called Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flame. There's a little quote here on page 139 that made me think of Dark Sky Alliance, and maybe this is my guesstimation of how things were working with you in that band. As an individual, you may have some insight, and that insight gives rise to compassion and a willingness to act. But as an individual, you can only do so much. If other people do not have the same insight, you have to do your best to make your insight a collective one. Yet, you cannot force your insight on others. You may force them to accept the idea, but then it is simply an idea, not a real insight. Insight is not an idea. The way to share your insight is to help create the conditions so that others can realize the same insight through their own experience, not just believing what you say. This takes skillfulness and patience. Your response, sir?
I don't know if I can formulate words after following something like that. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree, and it's always nice to hear words of reassurance like that. And it makes me think that I need to be that piece of the puzzle to provide a full picture. And when I work with artists such as yourself or, Jerry Marotta or Joe Locke, I'm only a small piece of that big puzzle, which is going to give you that sort of sensation when that last piece is put in and you get to see the forest that was on the box of the puzzle. Like when you put that together and you face it, remember it's made up of 1,000 puzzle pieces, but it becomes one.
Yeah, good answer. All right, let's end this the way we used to about 3 decades ago when we would say, you'd call me up and say, "What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing?"
What are you doing?
All right, Eric the Taylor, thank you so much. Let's get together for part 2 very soon.
All right, Malcolm. Thanks, man. This has been awesome.
All right, buddy.